What advice do you have for anyone starting on day one? What can they expect?
Yeah, starting a company is like eating glass and staring into the abyss of death. If that sounds appealing, go ahead.
Yeah? Why is that appealing?
It's going to be different for different people. In my case, the companies that I've started, I wanted to have a significant effect on the future of the world, or try to at least. And so it wasn't really from the perspective of figuring out what is the easiest way to make money, because that would have certainly ruled out rockets and electric cars.
If you're creating a company or if you're joining a company, the most important thing is to attract great people. So either join a group that's amazing, that you really respect, or if you're building a company, you've got to gather great people. I mean, all a company is a group of people that have gathered together to create a product or service. And so depending upon how talented and hardworking that group is, and the degree to which they're focused cohesively in a good direction, that will determine the success of the company. So do everything you can to gather great people if you're creating a company.
When you're building something new, there's going to be mistakes. And it's important to recognize those mistakes, acknowledge them, and take corrective action. And the success of a company is very much more about how quick are you to fix the mistakes, not will you make mistakes.
Or admit mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you see the difference between a startup that is successful and one that is not, and it's because the successful one, they both made mistakes, but the successful one recognized the mistakes, fixed them very quickly, and the unsuccessful one tries to deny that the mistakes exist.
I mean, as long as people stay super focused on creating the absolute best product or service that really delights their end customer, if they stay focused on that, then if you get it such that your customers want you to succeed, then you probably will.
All right, you have to focus on the customer and delivering for them.
Yeah, make sure if your customers love you, your odds of success are dramatically higher. In order to have a great company, you've got to focus your energies on a particular area. Something that Steve Jobs was that I think was quite admirable was he was ultra product focused, like down to the little detail. He and the other people at Apple would really try hard to have these, both at a high level and a small level, these delightful things happen. So the product was it just made you happy.
But in terms of what the rest of the world can do, or what sort of I'm trying to think of a useful thing I could say. It's do whatever you can to foster the growth of young small companies, because a young small company is it's like a little tadpole. It's got it's very fragile. Odds of success are very low. So anything that can be done to allow it to grow a little bit and to sustain itself in the face of much larger companies is extremely important. And so that would be my advice to, say, governments or on regional state level, is do whatever you can to shield the smaller companies and allow them to grow and be competitive, because the big companies will try to stamp them out.
I mean, do you have a lot of ideas like this? Is it where you have a sketch pad?
Yeah, I've got more ideas than time to implement.
Yeah.
I think so.
Is it something where do you come up with your best ideas? Are you on vacation, or are you kind of just like in the middle of the night you wake up and start drawing things down? Or
Sounds really cliche, but like the shower is probably like wake up and go to shower in the morning. And I think actually what's really happened is kind of stuff is percolated in the subconscious.
Right.
And it's not really occurring in the shower, but you're kind of getting the results of last night's computation, basically.
Right.
I'd say focus on signal over noise. A lot of companies get confused. They spend money on things that don't actually make the product better. So, for example, at Tesla, we've never spent any money on advertising. We put all of the money into R&D and manufacturing and design to try to make the car as good as possible. And I think that's the way to go. So, for any given company, just can keep thinking about, are these efforts that people are expending, are they resulting in a better product or service? And if they're not, stop those efforts.
Through your career, I'm sure you've seen that too, right? Where there have been projects that take time to evolve, but that's part of what it takes, I guess, right? Is kind of having that vision and pushing for it.
Sure. If you're going to try something innovative, then you're in unexplored territories, so the odds that something will go wrong are pretty high. If it's only if you try to do something that is already well understood that there's little chance of failure, but then it will not be interesting or innovative. So, for sure, uncharted territory will result in failures necessarily. Otherwise, you're not trying hard enough.
I think to be successful at almost anything, you have to do the tough stuff and as well as the enjoyable stuff. You have to do the boring stuff as well as the non-boring stuff. And if you don't do your chores, then bad things will happen. But if they don't do the things that they don't like to do, then the company will be in trouble. Like you have to, you basically, like it's more fun to cook the meal than to clean the dishes. Okay, but you need to clean the dishes.
You need to do both.
Yes, you need to do both, exactly.
For many of the entrepreneurs here who are, creating internet companies for the most part, is that, that has definitely been, or in the past decade, this crucible of innovation. Do you think that where are we in that cycle, or should they be looking elsewhere, like where you're looking?
Actually, I think for somebody who's just starting out as an entrepreneur, I think the internet is a great place to start. Because if you're just starting out, unless you've got a ton of capital that somebody gave you or you inherited or something, you have to start a company that requires a small amount of capital, where it's heavily weighted towards the intellectual capital in your head. So I think anything to do with sort of software and with the internet is a really good starting point.
Really liking what you do, whatever area that you get into, given that even if you're the best, there's always a chance of failure. So I think it's important that you really like whatever you're doing. If you don't like it, life is too short. I'd say, and also if you like what you're doing, you think about it even when you're not working. I mean, it's something that your mind is drawn to, and if you don't like it, you just really can't make it work, I think. So I really think a lot more smart people should be getting into manufacturing. And it's kind of fun. So it's like, I don't know how, it's sort of got a bad name for a while, but it's really interesting.
I mean, maybe there are occasionally companies that get created where there's not an extended period of extreme pain, but I'm not aware of very many of such instances. I would definitely advise people who are starting a company to expect a long period of quite high difficulty.
I think it's also important to reason from first principles rather than by analogy. So the normal way that we conduct our lives is we reason by analogy. We're doing this because it's like something else that was done, or it's like what other people are doing.
If you're going to create a company, the first thing you should try to do is create a working prototype. Everything looks great on PowerPoint. you can make anything work on PowerPoint. But if you have an actual demonstration article, even if it's in primitive form, that's much more effective for convincing people.
How it is to be successfully growing a small business to a large business.
Okay, well, I mean, to be frank, I don't think there's it's intrinsically good to grow a small business to a large business. Sometimes a small business should be a small business. Sometimes businesses shouldn't exist. It's not about growing a business for the sake of growing a business. You have to say, what is this important problem that you're trying to solve that really matters? And then go try to solve that.
Generally, for a company, when it's very small, productivity grows quickly because of specialization of labor. And then productivity per person declines due to communication issues as the company gets bigger. And as you have more and more layers through which communication has to flow, that necessarily imparts errors. Like every time information flows from one person to another, even with the best of intentions, you have information loss. So it's just broken telephone, basically. So to the degree that you can alleviate that by doing things like skip level meetings, I think it's a good idea. But I think now the companies are getting bigger, and even with skip level meetings, there's just a huge number of people I don't see at all. I think some kind of written document that people can refer to, sort of like the rules of the company and how things should work. I think is values. It's like your rules need to particularly capture counterintuitive things. If something's like fairly obvious, or then I guess people will probably do that. But but the counterintuitive stuff is less obvious. And one thing we have at the companies is we try to minimize the size of meetings.
And so it's certainly, it's easy to lose the sense of wonder or just see the flaws, you know, because, but it's a difficult thing to reconcile, because if you want to make something better, then you must analyze it for the flaws.
Yes.
And, but then that kind of prevents the enjoyment of it. It's a difficult dichotomy.
Is don't just follow the trend. So you may have heard me say that it's good to think in terms of the physics approach, or first principles, which is, rather than reasoning by analogy, you boil things down to the most fundamental truths you can imagine, and you reason up from there. And this is a good way to figure out if something really makes sense, or if it's just what everybody else is doing. It's hard to think that way. You can't think that way about everything. It takes a lot of effort. But if you're trying to do something new, it's the best way to think. And that framework was developed by physicists to figure out counterintuitive things, like quantum mechanics. So it's really a powerful method.
You know, starting a company for the first time is very challenging for a lot of people. They don't even know where to begin. You must have run into a lot of, I mean, we all made mistakes in starting our first company as far as hiring. Like you said, the people you bring in, like the CEO that replaced you.
Yeah.
Did you surround yourself with mentors? Who did you look to for advice?
I read a lot of books and talked to lots of people. I didn't have any one person who was a mentor, but I always looked for feedback from people around me, and feedback from an historical context, you know, which is books basically.
If you want to get great engineering talent, then the work itself has to be exciting. The best engineers want to work on the most innovative things, and then as you add great engineers to the company, they will in turn recruit other great engineers, and you know, talents of all kinds. So it's very important that the thing they're working on is intrinsically interesting.
I think like if like trying to work on something, and like my experience is like it's really hard to if you're trying to figure out what others love but you don't love it, it's really hard to make that great. So when you work on something, if you fall in love with it, that's a good sign. And then don't worry about if others do. If you do, others will.
Do you think that it takes extraordinary resources, the types of resources that you were able to accumulate to tackle these areas? Or do you think that any entrepreneur can tackle, you know, these areas just like any entrepreneur can create a mobile app or an internet service?
Well, I think the barriers to entry, the higher the capital requirements, the higher the barriers to entry. I mean, the reason why we haven't seen significant improvements in space transportation is because the barriers to entry is extremely high. It's normally the province of governments, and big governments at that. So when there are high barriers to entry, then you don't see the new entrants, and you don't see the innovation. It's really the new entrants that what drive innovation. For entrepreneurs that don't have capital, they're really going to have a hard time starting a company in a high capital business.
Right.
It's possible, but in order to do that, you have to work at a company that does something comparable, so you have a convincing story to venture capitalists to give you quite a significant amount of money, rather than instead of saying, say $3 million, you need say $30 or $40 million. It's a much higher hurdle.
Right.
So therefore, I think it's better to try doing something which requires low capital as kind of your first company. With the success of that, then take the capital from that and plow it into your second company. That's what I did, basically.
Right. Well,
So you are very famous in saying that failure is actually an option, and if you're not
Sure.
failing, that means you're not innovative enough.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like I like failure. I mean, who likes failure? It's terrible. But if you only do things that are certain to succeed, then you're only going to be doing very obvious things.
How, aside from making great products, how do you get people excited about Tesla? There's a lot of people I know and that I talk to who are just intrigued and interested and excited about Tesla as a company.
The key is like to have a product that people love, and generally people that if they're at a party or talking to friends or whatever, you'll talk about the things that you love. But if you just like something, it's okay. You're not going to care that much. But if
You
you
get
love
the reactions
something,
from the highs and the lows.
yeah,
So you
if
got to make sure
love
people
it,
really love
you're
it.
you're gonna talk, and then that'll generate word of mouth. And that's basically how our sales have grown. Like we don't spend any money on advertising or endorsements or so anyone like buys our car, they just bought it because they like the car, and it's genuine. No discounts. Like I actually even pay full retail price for my own cars.
Okay.
Particularly if you're starting a company, you need to work super hard. So what does super hard mean? Well, when my brother and I were starting our first company, instead of getting an apartment, we just rented a small office and we slept on the couch. And we showered at the YMCA, and we're so hot up we had just one computer. So the website was up during the day, and I was coding at night. 7 days a week, all the time. Work hard, every waking hour. That's the thing I would say, particularly if you're starting a company.